Let's talk about working with sessions. Sessions allow us to actually have variables stored across the entire time that the user is actually visiting our website. There's a timeout period and things like that, and it allows us to actually store variables like whether or not the user is logged in, their username, maybe their user ID, things like that. And we're able to set those and read those as we need to. You can register certain session variables as we're going to see, and you can see in this example, if we have a session that doesn't have any information, at some point we can set the variables. I'll show you how to do that, and then we can read the session. Now you see it's been read effectively, and we can also destroy the session. So we can destroy those variables if somebody logs out of the system, for example. So we'll take a look at that, how it works, and how it relates to a login system that we're also going to talk about as well, where you can log in and register and things like that. Everything's going to work very, very nicely in that regard. So there are a few different projects here, little scripts and things that we can actually look at, and we'll also look at how to register and how to read variables that are actually registered in the session information. But first we're going to look at the session super globals. And as you can see here, we're going to be looking at some session variables in a file called session super globals in the session state folder. In our editor, you can see that first we have a session start, which I'll explain that in another video on session functions. But basically it's going to set up the session so that this particular page can interact with the session. It's really a function. It has functionality that's going to be working behind the scenes, and it basically is going to start the session for this page. The session may already be started and stored, but it's just the function that we're going to have to use whenever we want to work with the session. The session itself is something that's stored on the server within the server memory, and it is something that we can access like we would an array, and this is one of the global arrays that we have, _session, and it's a $ in front, used like an array, and we can actually set variables here. And I set the keys here, I set them in uppercase because I consider them to be kind of special, and whenever I set session variables, I want to see them. Similar to constants, I want to know when they're there. So that's why I put them in caps. You don't have to, but it's more clear that way. And then you can use true or false, numeric data, all put in as strings, whatever you need to do, and reference them as you would other variables, and there's different ways that you can work with them. As you can see here, we have a way to check to see if the session logged in is set, for example, just like we would a variable. If it is set, then we want to actually reference that value, and that's going to see if it's true or false. So if it's not set, we have to further go in there and do another if condition and see if it's going to be a true value. So not only does it have to be set, but it has to be set to true, because the user could actually be logged out, or there could be some kind of break in the code that's not functioning correctly, because you really should check to see if it's set and whether it has been set to true. Those are the two concerns. And when you do that, then you're going to see that the user is logged in, and you can actually echo out that information, username, things like that. And we can actually put a space in between there just to make it a little bit more clear. And you can see that I have the user ID and the name there that we can take a peek at. Also know that you can unset things as well using the unset keyword, and it works just like any other variable. So that's pretty much how you can go through and manipulate that in many cases. You see that we also have for loops that we can use with our session because they're arrays, and we did take a look at this in the arrays section and also in different sections where we talk about the global arrays. Well, session is one of them, and you can use the key value pair just like any array and grab them. Same thing as we move down when we unset things. And maybe you want to use the unset to unset everything together. If you're going to log out or something like that, you can use a for to do that. So we can loop through as we need to. Note that we can set it this way on the bottom, and then we can also do an isSet here as our last example. And then when we look at the examples, you can see basically what we're doing here. You can see that we're logged in, we loop through the session variables, we output them here, and then we unset them as well. And then when we try to loop through them again, we can see that, whoops, nothing is set, because the session count is going to be 0. And that's because we unset everything. So you get the idea. This is going to be used across pages. So any page that uses session start and manipulates the session can look at these variables, and it makes it a lot easier to actually pass information between pages with form data, for example. And I use this often when I create forms. It makes for a lot easier processing. We'll see that when we look at our registration forms and things like that as we get into more advanced parts of the training. But for the most part, this is how we would introduce this. So let's continue and see some other things as well, some other details.